It was one of those mornings when the sky looked heavy, gray clouds rolling over the city, as if they already knew something was about to change. A black luxury car stopped in front of the Langston estate, a mansion that stood like a monument to wealth and loneliness. Inside it lived Margaret Langston, a billionaire widow known for her power, discipline, and cold heart. That morning, a new maid arrived. Her name was Lila Carter, 24, soft-spoken, nervous, clutching her small handbag like it was her only shield. She had come from a small town miles away, hoping for a fresh start. The mansion gates opened slowly with a sound that could almost send chills down your spine. As she walked up the marble steps, Lila couldn't help but stare at the grand windows, the silent statues, and the tall portrait staring down at her, like eyes frozen in time. When she entered the main hall, she found Mrs. Langston seated near the fireplace. Her silver hair perfectly tied, her posture regal, her eyes sharp as glass. The air between them was still. "Mrs. Langston?" Lila said softly. The old woman didn't respond at first. She just looked her up and down, assessing, not with warmth but with calculation. "You're the new girl," she finally said. "I hope you last longer than the others." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it carried something worse. Expectation. Lila nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. I'll do my best." She was shown to her quarters, a small room at the back of the mansion, simple but clean. As she unpacked, she noticed something strange about the place. It was beautiful but cold. No laughter. No family photos. Just echoes of what once was. Later that afternoon, Lila began her work. Dusting, arranging, cleaning. The house was enormous, filled with antiques and priceless art. She was careful with every touch, and then it happened. While setting a tea tray in front of Mrs. Langston, Lila reached forward, and the old woman's eyes suddenly widened. Margaret froze mid-sentence, her gaze fixed on Lila's hand. The delicate gold ring around Lila's finger glimmered faintly in the firelight. A simple design. A small emerald in the center. For a long, silent moment, Mrs. Langston didn't breathe. Her face turned pale, her teacup trembling slightly in her hand. Where did you get that ring?" she finally whispered. Lila blinked, startled. "This? Oh, it was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed away." The color drained from Margaret's face completely. Her voice broke. "Your mother? What was her name?" "Isabella," Lila replied, unaware of the storm she'd just unleashed. The old woman's eyes filled with something no one had seen before. Fear and recognition. The clock on the wall ticked louder. Then, without another word, Margaret stood up and left the room, her footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. Lila stood frozen, her heart pounding, the silence heavier than ever. Something about that reaction didn't feel right. It wasn't just surprise. It was shock, as if that ring had just opened a door Margaret thought was locked forever. That night the mansion felt different. It wasn't just quiet. It was haunted by silence. The kind of silence that makes every creak of the floorboard sound like a whisper. Lila couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Langston's reaction earlier that day. The way her hands had trembled. The way she'd left without saying a word. She tried convincing herself it was nothing. Maybe the ring had reminded the old woman of someone she'd lost. But deep down, something in her gut said otherwise. By morning, the atmosphere in the mansion had shifted. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Doyle, avoided eye contact. The gardener paused whenever Lila passed by. And when she entered the kitchen, the chatter stopped mid-sentence. She caught fragments of whispers, just enough to sting her curiosity. "Did you see her ring?" "It's identical. Exactly like, don't say it out loud. You know what happened last time." Lila turned, but the moment she stepped closer, the staff busied themselves as if nothing had happened. Something was being hidden here, and it was connected to her ring. Later that afternoon, as Lila dusted the piano room, Mrs. Langston entered quietly. She stood by the window, staring out into the garden. Her reflection in the glass looked like a ghost, distant, lost in time. Without turning around, she spoke softly. "Where did your mother live, Miss Carter?" Lila hesitated. "In Willow Creek, ma'am. A small town south of here. My grandmother raised her. She didn't talk much about her past." Mrs. Langston's fingers gripped her cane tightly. Her voice lowered, almost trembling. "And she gave you that ring before she died?" "Yes," Lila said, gently twisting the emerald band. "She told me it once belonged to someone very dear to her." For a moment, Mrs. Langston closed her eyes. A tear almost formed, but she wiped it away before it could fall. "Keep it safe," she whispered. It's more valuable than you think." Then she turned and left, again without another word. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. The air in the mansion seemed heavier. The old portraits along the hallway appeared to watch her as she passed. In the dim light of her room, she took off the ring and placed it on the table. The faint emerald shimmered under the lamplight, mysterious, almost alive. Suddenly, a thump echoed from upstairs. Then another, slow, dragging footsteps across the hall above her room. She froze. There were only 2 people living in the house that night, her and Mrs. Langston, heart racing. She stepped out into the corridor, the wooden floor groaning under her feet. When she reached the staircase, she glanced up and saw a light flickering in the old study. Someone was in there, and as she stood there, a cold realization hit her. The study was supposed to have been locked for years. The next morning arrived with a strange calm. Sunlight slipped through the tall curtains, but even the light seemed reluctant to touch the cold marble floors. Lila couldn't shake what she'd seen last night, the flickering light from the locked study. She was certain someone had been there, but when she mentioned it to Mrs. Doyle, the housekeeper just shook her head. "That room's been closed for nearly 30 years, she whispered. "No one goes in there anymore." Lila frowned. "Then who turned on the light?" Mrs. Doyle's face went pale. "Don't ask questions, dear. Some things are better left alone in this house. But curiosity has a way of turning fear into courage, and by noon, while Mrs. Langston rested in her suite, Lila found herself standing outside the door of the forbidden study. The doorknob was cold. She turned it and expecting resistance, but to her surprise, it clicked open. The air inside was thick with dust, like a trapped memory. Old books lined the shelves. A faded globe stood in the corner, and on the large mahogany desk sat a cracked picture frame, half covered in cobwebs. Lila gently wiped it clean. It was a family portrait. A young couple stood proudly beside a little girl, no older than 4, smiling, dressed in white. The girl's hair was curly, her eyes bright, and her small hand rested on her mother's arm. But what made Lila's heart stop was the ring, the same emerald band, the same gold shimmer, the exact same design that now sat on her own finger. Her breath caught. She looked closer. The woman in the photo. She recognized her face. She'd seen that face before. Not in real life, but in the hallway, among the old portraits. It was Margaret Langston, decades younger. Lila stepped back, her pulse racing. What was this photo doing here? And who was the little girl? She looked at the frame again and noticed something carved faintly on the back. Initials. I.L. Her mother's initials. Isabella Langston. The name struck her like lightning, but how could that be? Her mother's last name was Carter. She'd never mentioned anything about the Langstons. As Lila stood frozen, she heard the faint creak of the floorboards behind her. She turned sharply, but no one was there. Only the whisper of wind brushing through the half-open window. Her hands trembled as she placed the photo back down. And that's when she noticed something else. A locked drawer beneath the desk slightly ajar. A sliver of yellowed paper peeked out from inside. She tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Still, she caught a glimpse of an old letter with Mrs. Langston's handwriting on it. At that moment, a sharp voice broke the silence. "Lila." She spun around. Mrs. Langston stood in the doorway, her eyes burning with fury. "What are you doing in here?" I was just cleaning, ma'am." "The door was open. Get out!" The old woman snapped. Lila stumbled out, heart pounding, tears forming in her eyes. But as she walked down the hall, one thought consumed her. Why was her mother's name carved on that frame? Inside Margaret Langston's study? The mansion felt colder after that day. Mrs. Langston didn't speak to Lila for the next 2 days. Meals were taken alone. Instructions came through the housekeeper. The silence wasn't just awkward, it was deliberate. But Lila couldn't stop thinking about that photograph. The little girl with her mother's ring. The initials I.L. carved in faded wood. She knew she wasn't imagining it. There was something in that study. Something Mrs. Langston didn't want her to see. So one night, when the mansion slept beneath the soft hum of the rain, Lila decided to go back. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, carried a candle, and crept through the dark corridor. Each step echoed, every creak louder than her heartbeat. The door to the study groaned open once more. Dust hung in the air like fog. She kneeled beside the desk and tugged at the locked drawer. It wouldn't move at first, but a few desperate pulls made the old lock snap loose. Inside were old letters, yellowed with time. tied with a faded red ribbon. And beneath them, a birth certificate. Lila's hands trembled as she unfolded the fragile paper. Name, Isabella Langston. Mother, Margaret Langston. Father, Charles Langston. Date of birth, June 14, 1965. She gasped. Her knees nearly gave out. Her mother, Isabella, was Margaret's daughter. The letters confirmed it. They were written in Margaret's delicate, cursive handwriting dated decades ago. My dearest Isabella, not a day passes that I don't think of you. Forgive me for what I've done. Forgive me for letting them take you. Charles said it was best for the family, but no mother's heart can ever believe that. Lila covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her mother had never spoken about her childhood. She'd always said her parents were gone. But now Lila understood. She'd been taken away, hidden, erased from the Langston legacy. Suddenly, the candle flickered. A floorboard creaked. Someone was coming. She quickly tucked the papers into her apron and slipped behind the curtains as the study door opened. Mrs. Langston entered, her cane tapping lightly on the wood. She stood by the desk, touching the photo frame, the same one Lila had cleaned. Her voice was trembling. I thought I'd buried all of this, she whispered. Why now? After all these years? Then she looked toward the window, directly where Lila was hiding. For a second it seemed as if their eyes met through the shadows. Isabella, the old woman murmured softly, voice breaking. I'm so sorry. Lila pressed a hand over her mouth, holding back a sob. She knew now. The woman she worked for, the billionaire with the cold heart, was her grandmother. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to reveal it. Not yet, because deep inside she could feel it. This story wasn't finished. There was still something darker hidden beneath all that sorrow. Something Margaret Langston wasn't ready to confess. The storm came without warning. Thunder cracked across the sky like a scream from the heavens. Rain hammered the mansion windows, the wind howling through the empty halls. Inside, Lila paced her small room, clutching the letters and birth certificate against her chest. She could feel her heart pounding through her palms. For days she had carried the truth like a secret flame, one that burned heavier with every heartbeat. She knew she couldn't stay silent any longer, not after learning that her entire life had been built on someone else's silence. She took a deep breath, gathered the papers, and stepped into the corridor. Lightning flashed, painting the walls white for a split second, illuminating portraits of ancestors who seemed to stare in judgment. When she reached Mrs. Langston's room, she hesitated at the door. She could hear the faint sound of classical music playing from inside, a piano melody trembling like memory. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Mrs. Langston. It's me, Lila. The door creaked open slowly. The old woman sat by the fireplace, her face half lit by the flames. She didn't look surprised, almost as if she had been expecting her. What is it? She asked quietly, her voice frail. Lila stepped closer, her hands shaking. I found something. In the study? Margaret's gaze lifted slowly, her eyes clouded with emotion. You went in there again, didn't you? Lila nodded. I had to. I needed to know the truth. She placed the letters and the certificate on the small table between them. The papers fluttered under the breeze. I know who my mother was, Lila said softly. Her name was Isabella Carter. But that wasn't her real name, was it? Margaret's breath caught. Her hands trembled as she reached for the letters. Her voice broke. I thought those were gone. Lila's eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why did you pretend she never existed? The thunder outside rumbled like an answer. Margaret stood slowly, her cane shaking in her grasp. Because I had no choice. Her words cracked like glass. She turned toward the window, staring into the rain. When Isabella was born, my husband, Charles, was furious. She wasn't supposed to exist. He said our empire couldn't afford scandal. My sister had died giving birth, and he insisted we take the child in as our own. But then, he changed his mind. She swallowed hard, fighting tears. He sent her away. To an orphanage. Said it was to protect our name. I begged him to stop, but he threatened to destroy everything. I thought she was safe. I thought she'd live a good life. Lila's lips quivered. She did. But she never knew who she really was. She died believing she was unwanted. The old woman broke down. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face as she sank into her chair. I searched for her for years, she whispered. By the time I found her name again, she was already gone. Lightning flashed again, this time revealing both of their faces mirrored in sorrow. Margaret reached out a trembling hand toward Lila. "Your mother's ring," she whispered. "It was hers. I gave it to her the day before they took her. I told her, as long as she wore it, she'd never be forgotten." Lila stared at the ring on her finger, and for the first time she understood. It wasn't just jewelry. It was proof of love, proof of loss, proof of a past that refused to stay buried. Margaret's voice cracked once more. "Now I see. I never lost her completely. She sent you back to me." The storm quieted into a soft drizzle, but the tension inside the mansion only grew heavier. Lila sat across from Mrs. Langston, her eyes still wet, her hands clutching the old ring, the ring that had carried generations of pain, love, and secrets. Margaret's breathing was shallow. Her eyes glistened with tears that she no longer had the strength to hide. "I kept this secret for half a century," she whispered. "And yet the truth found its way back. Through you." Lila looked down at her ring, the small emerald catching the flicker of the fireplace. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Why this ring, Mrs. Langston? What does it mean?" Margaret smiled weakly, a smile touched with guilt and love. "That ring," she said, "wasn't just jewelry. It was a promise." She leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the window. The rain traced lines down the glass like tears from the sky. "Every firstborn daughter in our family received it," she continued softly. "It was meant to protect them, a blessing from my grandmother. My mother gave it to me when I had Isabella. I passed it to her when they took her away, praying she'd never forget who she truly was." Her voice trembled. "But when you walked in that morning wearing that very ring, I thought my heart had stopped. For a moment I believed I was seeing her ghost." Lila's eyes filled with tears again. "I didn't even know what it meant. My mother never told me where it came from. She said it belonged to someone who once loved her more than anything." Margaret covered her mouth, trying to stifle a sob. She remembered. She whispered, "Even after everything, she remembered me." The two women sat in silence, generations apart, yet bound by one small piece of gold. Then Margaret reached for Lila's hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling as they wrapped around the younger woman's. "Lila," she said softly, "you are my granddaughter, the only family I have left." The words hung in the air, fragile, trembling, real. Lila froze. Her throat tightened. She had dreamed of family all her life, of belonging somewhere, and now it was standing right in front of her in tears. "Why didn't you find her sooner?" she asked through her tears. "Why didn't you fight harder?" Margaret looked down, ashamed. "I was a coward," she admitted. "I let fear guide me. I let wealth and reputation silence a mother's heart. And I've paid for it every single day since." Her voice broke completely. "I never deserved forgiveness. But I hope, maybe you can give me a second chance." Lila couldn't speak. She only reached forward, wiping the tears from the old woman's cheek. "Maybe it's not too late," she whispered. Outside, the rain began to fade, replaced by the faint sound of birds returning to the wet garden. Inside, something long buried had finally begun to heal. The morning came quietly. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and calm. Sunlight peeked through the curtains, touching the silver frames and golden vases of the Langston mansion. But inside, two women sat in silence, the air thick with emotion that words could no longer carry. Lila was the first to speak. "Do you really believe my mother knew?" she asked softly, staring into her cup of untouched tea. Margaret smiled faintly, her wrinkled hands folded on her lap. "She knew, child. A mother always knows. I can feel it now. She sent you here for a reason." Lila's lips quivered. "I spent my life wondering why my mother cried at night. She always said some wounds don't heal. They just pass down." Her voice cracked. "Now I finally understand what she meant." Margaret's eyes filled again. "I've carried the same wound, Lila. Every morning I woke up hoping for a knock on that door, hoping she'd come back to me. And when you walked in that day, I didn't just see a maid. I saw her. The same eyes, the same ring, the same gentle soul." Lila's tears slipped down her cheeks. "You didn't see a maid," she whispered. "You saw your granddaughter." The old woman nodded, her voice trembling, and I was too afraid to believe it. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Margaret stood, slow, weak, but determined. She walked to where Lila sat and reached out a shaking hand. "Come here," she said softly. Lila rose, her heart pounding, unsure what to expect. And then, in a moment that time seemed to hold still for, Margaret pulled her close. wrapping her frail arms around the young woman and holding her tight. It wasn't just a hug. It was a lifetime of love finally finding its way home. The housekeeper, Mrs. Doyle, who had silently watched from the hall, covered her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Even the air felt lighter, as if the mansion itself was exhaling after years of holding its breath. Margaret wept into Lila's shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered again and again, "for everything. For not being there. For letting them take her. For letting you grow up without me." Lila held her just as tightly. "You can't change the past," she said softly. "But we can start again." The old woman smiled through her tears. "Then let's start now." Outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds completely, painting the old Langston estate in gold. 2 generations stood together, no longer divided by secrets or guilt. The emerald ring sparkled between their joined hands, no longer a symbol of pain but of reunion. And for the first time in decades, the Langston mansion finally felt like home again. Some heirlooms don't just hold value. They hold memories, regrets, and the whispers of those long gone. The emerald ring was never about wealth. It was about love, broken, lost, and finally found again. In that old mansion, 2 souls healed what history had torn apart. Forgiveness bridged generations, and the past finally laid to rest. Sometimes family isn't discovered through blood tests or papers, but through tears, truth, and a single hug that says, "You were never forgotten." And as the sunlight touched their hands, the curse of silence was finally lifted.